Who wants to read about a woman, is what publishers said, not me, about Dorothy Johnson's book The Prisoner of Skull Creek, which later got adapted into the excellent 1959 western The Hanging Tree. The book was first published as The Hanging Tree as well, and Johnson played a key role in the western genre. If you like the phrase, behind every great man there's a great woman, then you'll probably not be surprised to learn that Dorothy Johnson wrote the books behind several of the movies that established male stars as icons. In this movie, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and A Man Called Horse, three of the very iconic film westerns. This movie is a fantastic exploration of capitalism in America in the Old West, but I'll get to that in my next video, because the movie and the book could have been totally different. In an extremely weird coincidence, friend of the channel Je ne sais quoi and I picked this movie and the excellent 2010 movie Meek's Cutoff to do my latest podcast episode on. And in the course of researching the movie for the podcast, I was able to find this excellent master's thesis written by Jean Maslowski Emery that goes into the book's sordid publishing history. Here's why it's a weird coincidence. Meek's Cutoff is a western by Kelly Reichardt told explicitly from a woman's POV about an ill-fated wagon train that goes west and runs out of water. Now, the gist of my podcast is that the guest picks a movie, then I pick a movie in response, and we watch them separately, then get on a pod to talk about them. And I was just picking this movie because I had seen it before and loved it, but Dorothy Johnson actually wrote her original manuscript after having seen two different films about men lost in the desert and asking herself the question, what if, instead of having a bunch of men lost and thirsty in the desert, it was about a woman? This was not uncommon for Johnson, Emery writes. Quote, there is another less well-known side to Johnson. More than half of Johnson's published works are told from the viewpoint of women, children, and Native Americans, an all too rare perspective in Western fiction of the day. She was especially interested in making sure Native Americans were depicted accurately. She was frustrated with the movie A Man Called Horse because they changed the accurate depictions of Crow Native Americans to be Sioux. So frustrated that she requested, and got, her name omitted from the credits for its sequels. Johnson, quote, never outgrew her interest in outlaws and Native Americans, and her frequent exploration of female and Native American viewpoints in her work offered another perspective to the stereotypical Western story. Her efforts in The Hanging Tree suggest that the crustiness and acerbic tongue that Johnson was known for in her private life vocalized the struggles of a woman thwarted by the social conventions of her time. Elizabeth Armistead, the woman in the story and the book, manifests the symptoms of agoraphobia, and her illness mirrors the behavior of thousands, perhaps millions, of other upper and middle class women of the late 19th century. Yet in the end, The Hanging Tree is a story of romance, a woman's quest tale with only one inevitable holy grail: marriage. A big part of the reason for the yet in that excerpt is because of the publishing process that brought The Hanging Tree from a 65,000 word novel exploring the psychology of a woman lost on the frontier into a 39,000 word novella that was part of a collection of stories. As Emery writes, The Hanging Tree became less about a woman lost in the desert and the consequences of that event than about Doc Joe Frail, a loner with a secret past, unrivaled skill with a pistol and a deck of cards, and a fated meeting with frontier justice at the end of a hanging rope. In other words, the standard Western archetype of the day. Johnson wanted to ask, as Emery puts it, questions like, what woman, what kind of woman, would be lost in the desert alone? How could she adhere to or refute the cultural expectations of a 19th century woman? What would be the male response to this interloper? The complications of switching the gender and the typical protagonist in this type of story would have, quote, struck at the very heart of societal conventions. But how did publishers and editors feel about it after Johnson submitted that story? Well, Elizabeth, the main character, was, quote, tiresome. Johnson was urged by publishers and editors to downplay this woman's angle. It was, quote, boring because of its claustrophobic theme. The psychological focus was undramatic. Emery writes, one editor described Elizabeth as too true to the period, implying that this publication house at least believed the book-reading public was not interested in stories reflecting deep-seated psychological anxieties about the Western experience, especially towards women. And this forced assignment of gender roles tragically extended to Johnson's life. Quote, many magazine publishers insisted that she keep her gender a secret, fearing their predominantly male readers would not take kindly to a woman writing westerns. Many other editors routinely ran her stories under the name D.M. Johnson. Emery recounts, when Johnson eventually confronted one editor at a party, she says that he finally would let me write as a woman, but I never sold him another thing. And the editors were successful. They gaslit Johnson into thinking that the story was bad too, leaving her to excise parts like Elizabeth learning how to use a gun. Elizabeth in earlier drafts has a, quote, unconcealed appetite for gold that disappears. Elizabeth, like Johnson, is surrounded by the openness of the West in these drafts, but feels as if she's a cabin-bound prisoner. Lines exploring this dynamic were cut, such as the doctor in the story telling Elizabeth that the people in the camp are greedy and avaricious. Quote, I would be too if there was any opportunity, Elizabeth says with an edge of sharpness. The piece then exhaustively and grimly goes into editors butchering what sounds like an incredible story into one that, while well received, was one that we'd kind of seen before. A woman's perspective on being lost in the West in the desert wouldn't get a chance on screen for another 60 years. It's an incredible piece, with its ending chapter capturing the tragic assignment of gender roles that spoiled the character of Elizabeth in the original story, the idea of a character like Elizabeth even getting to have her story told, and Johnson herself. In brilliant writing, Emery sums it up in the beginning of her closing chapter, writing this about the cover art on the 1984 biography of Johnson. Johnson, softly waved white hair, cat's eye glasses, and a prim, plain navy sheath with white Peter Pan collar, fills the center of the frame. She looks the image of a prim librarian, except for the glossy bear claw necklace draped around her neck, seemingly poised to lash out at passing prey. Far in the distance is the spectacular landscape on which the former owners of those deadly claws once roamed: snow-capped peaks, rolling green hills, grassy prairies. But the free-ranging spirit in Johnson that is alluded to in the portrait is barred from those wide-open spaces by a quartet of Hollywood Western heroes also portrayed portrayed on the cover: John Wayne, Gary Cooper, Jimmy Stewart, and Lee Marvin, actors who played the leading roles in 3 of Johnson's short stories turned into movies. Those 4 men exuding toughness, stoicism, power, and heroic honor, hemming Johnson in like a Bronco-proof corral. She's confined to a small, claustrophobic space in the very foreground of the illustration. The breathing room allowed Johnson in this artist summing up of a career includes a simple desk, carved chair, and a bulky gray manual typewriter. Near to hand are 2 neat and tidy stacks of plain white paper. What the image unconsciously portrays is the circumscribed world of a Western woman, even a talented and ambitious one. The 4 men act as the little lady's protectors from the Wild West behind them. In fact, they present a nearly impenetrable wall that both real and fictional Western women encountered when they attempted to make the same use men did of the West, a blank slate where individual fortune and identity could be written anew, uncovered, and nourished.